Welcome to the 2023 Officer Onboarding Training, a mandatory step in the annual registration process for all of our incoming RSO presidents and finance officers. Please note, if you are not an incoming finance officer or president for your registered student organization, you actually cannot complete this requirement for credit in the annual registration process. You can always email engage@godtech.edu if you have any questions about this. Starting with introductions, hello everyone. My name is Alyssa Rodriguez and I am the coordinator for student organizations in the Center for Student Engagement. My role here in the center is really all about supporting you all as RSOs. And I'm not alone in this work that I do, of course. I do it alongside our Director of Student Organizations, Quincy Foster, who uses they, them pronouns. Together, Quinn and I actually created this training with a few different goals in mind that I want to tell you about before we start. One, our first goal is to teach you about the basics of being an RSO leader here at Georgia Tech. Our second goal is to inform you of the resources available to your organization. Our third goal is to update you on the policies that you work within as an RSO. And our fourth goal is to provide clarity and guidance on your incoming role as a student leader. Now, while this training is a mandatory requirement, we're all incoming officers here, okay? And many of us have questions about how things work and what we need to do. And this presentation is really just meant to have a back to basics approach about it. We're hoping to give you a quick crash course in all the things you need to know to be an effective RSO leader. Now, Quinn and I couldn't do this alone either, as we are a part of an even bigger team that helps us do this work. Although Quinn and I make up the student organizations team, we are part of a bigger office that's actually called the Center for Student Engagement. You might have heard of it. The Center for Student Engagement is actually located on the third floor of the John Lewis Student Center, and we are home to 4 different areas of campus engagement. This includes civic engagement, fraternity and sorority life, student media, and student organizations. That's us. Along with our professional staff, we also have a team of over 15 student assistants that you might have met. If you ever pop by any of our offices, these are the students that are greeting you at the door. They also assist us with a lot of things such as answering your emails, processing annual registrations, and maintaining the weekly daily digest. So if you ever have questions, these are the people that you want to ask. Now that you've met the team and you know who to call for help, let's get into today's agenda. Throughout our webinar today, we will be reviewing 4 different sections. First, introduction and overview to annual registration. So just getting settled with what this process actually is and what you can expect from it. 2, how to annual registration. This just means I'm going to quickly show you how you can actually find help in completing the steps that are within the process and the online form. 3, we're going to do a quick policy and finance overview, and I'm sure a recap for some of you. In this overview, we have just a few policies that we want you to keep in mind and some information regarding funding and finances that we think would be helpful for you all as RSO leaders. And then 4th and finally, we are going to end with some tips and tutorials for managing your organization throughout the year. So as you can see, we have a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. Introduction and overview. This portion of the webinar will be an introduction and overview of the annual registration process. So, what is annual registration? Annual registration is an annual process that all registered student organizations are required to complete in order to remain active organizations. So, think of this process as renewing your organization's contract with Georgia Tech. Basically, this registration process provides us with information that tells us a few different things. 1, annual registration tells us that you are still aware of your responsibilities and relationship as an organization with Georgia Tech, and that you're choosing to renew that relationship. 2, annual registration ensures that you are informed on how to access the resources that are afforded to you as an RSO. As you all know, you do get some benefits that non-registered student organizations do not, and we want to make sure that you know how to use them and access them. 3, your annual registration process will confirm that your organization is still in compliance with all of GT's policies. For example, this process will confirm for us that you have an incoming president, an incoming finance officer, and an advisor. It'll also ensure that you update your Engage portal, all required processes for compliance. And 4, for managing risk, getting information to you from the beginning of your role allows us to be proactive in ensuring that every organization knows how to remain policy compliant and avoid risk in the future should any occur. Now, who is involved in the AR process? Great question. This year, only 3 individuals are needed to complete your AR process. All of these individuals are required positions that your RSO must already have, so it shouldn't be too hard to find these people and ask them for a little help. Your president, finance officer, and advisor will each complete their own separate form within this process. Now, the president is expected to complete 2 forms. One of them is going to be the follow-up form to this training, and the other one is going to be the actual annual registration form itself. Now, the finance officer and the advisor are only expected to complete 1 form. Together, these 3 positions within your RSO will help your organization complete the annual registration. All right, now let's go over some of the required steps of actually completing the annual registration process. Starting with step 1, attend the Officer Onboarding Training. Congrats, you're doing it right now. Attending the Officer Onboarding Training is mandatory for all senior executive officers, also known as presidents, and finance officers. So both your president and your finance officer must attend this mandatory Officer Onboarding Training. After you all both attend this training, you're then going to have to complete a form. Now, this form is step 2, but really it's kind of a part of step 1. You have to complete this form in order to receive credit for attending the Officer Onboarding Training. If you don't complete this form, we won't know that you attended the training. So make sure that you complete that form and let us know. 3, the next step is that your president or your incoming senior executive officer, whatever you call the position, is going to log into Engage and complete the annual registration form. So once your president navigates to your registered student organization's Engage portal, there will be a big blue button on the screen that says re-register my org. This is the button that all presidents or senior executive officers will select to complete the annual registration form. Once you press this button, Engage will take you to a form that has step-by-step questions that you can fill out about your organization. 4, the advisor form. So this step can only be completed by your advisor. However, we do recommend that you consider setting up an appointment with them just to complete it alongside them, just so you all can maybe talk through some advising expectations or discussions that you want to have for the year. And this advisor form, we're basically just asking advisors what organizations they advise. If you know an advisor that advises multiple, they can add all of the organizations into one single form. So make sure that they know that. All this form is asking us for their basic information and that they have approval to be an advisor for an RSO. So make sure that you get this 4th step done. 5 are the terms and conditions. So this is actually a step that is going to come after your annual registration form is already approved. You're going to get a notification in Engage that tells you have to accept the terms and conditions. The terms and conditions are only something that has to be completed by your incoming president and your finance officer. And it basically just has you accept the terms and conditions of your position and agree that you are the president for your organization. So make sure after you get the notification in Engage that you go and accept those terms and conditions. 6, check your progress. So this is a step that you can actually use throughout any point of this process, but we have a tracking spreadsheet at bit.ly/RSOs, don't forget the S, 2023. So if you visit this link here, you'll be able to view exactly where you are in the process, what you've completed, and what steps you have left. Now, what is the timeline for all these steps? Great question. Officially, the annual registration process opens every year on Engage at 8 a.m. on January 1st. We allow all of our organizations a few months to complete this process and all the steps that we just reviewed. So the annual registration form will officially close on April 13th, 2023. Make sure you mark your calendars. The following day, our student assistants are going to be sending out suspension notification emails to all organizations that did not complete annual registration on schedule. Suspended organizations are then going to have until September 2023 to complete registration. Now, if you don't complete registration, we will not lift your suspension. And if your suspension is not lifted, then you will become an inactive organization. If your organization becomes inactive, you're going to have to follow all of the steps as listed within the chartering process, otherwise known as the process to start a brand new registered student organization. So make sure that you mark your calendar for when registration closes. And if you get a notification that you've been suspended on April 14th, make sure you get registration done as soon as possible, because there's still a chance that you can become active again before the fall semester. Tutorials. This portion of the webinar will include tutorials, tools, and resources that will help you as you complete annual registration. To help each of you complete the annual registration process, we've gathered a few QR codes for you that each have unique tutorials within them. So starting with adding members and changing officers, these two tutorials are actually very important as this year we will be completely wiping rosters clean as part of the registration process. We are taking everything out, and the information that you give us during this process is what we're going to use to put it all back in. Now, you're going to be responsible for inviting all of your individual members and your officers back to your portal and maybe even assigning new positions. So follow this QR codes in the blue and pink box to make sure you know how to do these processes on Engage. Next, after your annual registration form is approved, you will be expected to complete something called terms and conditions that I mentioned earlier. This is something that finance officers and presidents will have to log into Engage to accept, and this is basically just you accepting responsibility for your position officially. So follow the QR code in the green box to learn more about what you can expect from this process and how to accept your terms and conditions. And finally, throughout this entire process, our student assistants will be tracking everything, so you can follow the QR code in the yellow box to regularly check your annual registration process and see what requirements you might have left. Policy review. This portion of the webinar will include policies that all RSOs must work within and be aware of. Because RSOs receive benefits and resources, it's important to note that your recognition is only official if you agree to comply with all of our applicable GT policies and procedures. Let's look over some of these policies now and a few others to get familiar with them. Starting with the Student Code of Conduct. The Student Code of Conduct applies to all individual students and RSOs, and the code exists to educate all members of the Georgia Tech community about the Institute's expectations and students' rights, and creates a standard by which students are expected to conduct themselves for the purpose of establishing an environment conducive to academic excellence. So make sure that you check out our Student Code of Conduct to ensure that your organization is working within it. Next is the Alcohol and Other Drugs Policy. RSOs regularly find themselves using the alcohol and other drugs policy when hosting events, programs, or meetings with alcohol. The policy even includes an event planning form. So definitely check this one out for a full guide through the process and requirements for hosting an event that may include alcohol. Next is the Equal Opportunity, Non-Discrimination, and Anti-Harassment Policy. This is basically just the non-discrimination statement that we actually require all of you all to include in your Constitution. Now, this statement says, Georgia Tech prohibits discrimination, including discriminatory harassment on the basis of race, ethnicity, ancestry, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, national origin, age, disability, genetics, or veteran status in its programs, activities, employment, and admissions. This prohibition applies to faculty, staff, students, and all other members of the Georgia Tech community, including affiliates, invitees, even guests to your events. The non-discrimination statement applies to all RSO activities, and it should definitely guide your decision-making as RSO leaders, so be aware of it. Next up is the Youth Programs Policy. So the Youth Programs Policy is actually intended to help those involved with youth programs and ensure that the safety and well-being of non-student minors both on and off campus is being protected. So part of this policy requires some events and meetings that may involve people under the age of 18 to be registered by the Institute. If you hold any kind of events, meetings, or activities like this is definitely a policy that you should be paying attention to, and you should check it out to see if it may apply to your RSO, just in case. Next up is the hazing policy. The hazing policy applies to all registered student organizations. Remember that hazing is illegal and against GT policies, and that hazing can happen in any organization. As leaders, you all should all be aware of this. Hazing is defined in our policy as any intentional, negligent, or reckless action or situation which causes another pain, embarrassment, ridicule, or harassment, regardless of the willingness of the participant. Read the full policy online to learn more about activities that are considered hazing. And finally, the RSO policy. The RSO policy applies to all RSOs and groups seeking to become RSOs. This policy really just guides processes such as our chartering and our annual registration process. And it's also the reason why we have many strict deadlines, steps, and processes that we follow. So if you're ever wondering, why does the Center for Student Engagement do that? You can check out our RSO policy, and I'm sure it would be listed within there. RSO Finances. This portion of the webinar will provide you with information on how you can best request and manage funds. All right, now one of the best benefits of being a registered student organization is having access to various funding sources. And if you look at the chart that I have here on the screen, you'll see that I've outlined the timeline of requesting funding from a few different funding sources. For example, you'll see that in the second column, all of the funding sources except for SGA budgets can be requested in the spring. So please note, if you're looking for money in the fall, if you're looking for money in the spring, check back on this chart and see which of these funding sources you can request from. Moving on to the other three columns, you'll see that I have outlined what kinds of things these different sources will fund. So, for example, again, SGA budgets will not fund giveaways or food. However, they will fund service. So if you're looking to get food for an event, SGA budgets might not be the way to go, but Parents Fund, Buzz Fund, Move Service Grant, and the Student Foundation Grant are all really great options for you. So feel free to use this chart as a reference in the future for what kind of funding is available to you and when. And please note that most of these funds are managed by completely different offices or individuals. And this means that they may be operating on different timelines and application processes. Make sure that you reach out to each source directly for more information on their specific procedures, as it may differ from others. Finance resources. So there are actually a few different places you can visit for additional finance resources. Starting off at the top, you can always contact our Student Organization Finance Office, otherwise known as SOFO. SOFO actually has designated accountants for all registered student organizations, and if you visit their website at sofo.godtech.edu, you can learn all about their processes. Next, you can also reach out to the SGA Joint VP of Finance and the Joint Finance Committee. They handle all of the SGA bills and budget processes within the organization. So you can find out more about them at sga.godtech.edu, or you can email finance at sga.godtech.edu. You can also check out the IRS website for more information on what it means to be a nonprofit and a tax-exempt social club. And lastly, you can always visit our website, the Center for Student Engagement, at studentengagement.godtech.edu for any finance resources. RSO Management. This portion of the webinar will provide you with tools, resources, and tips for leading your RSO. If you haven't already visited our website at studentengagement.godtech.edu, I highly encourage you to do so. As an RSO leader, there are many resources available to provide guidance on how to manage your organization. So let's take a look at a key few that we happen to get a lot of questions about. Starting with events. You will scan this QR code with your phone to learn how to create events and engage, manage RSVP settings, and track attendance. Many RSO leaders don't actually know this, but creating an event and engage is the only way to get your event included in the daily digest or weekly digest emails that all students receive. After you create an event and engage, you actually get a question that asks you, would you like to have it included in various institute communications? And you can designate which ones you want it to be in. Moving on to officer positions, it is required for all organizations to update their required officer positions. For reference, the required officer positions are Senior Executive Officer, also known as President, and Finance Officer, and the Advisor. So you can scan the QR code in the yellow box to find our tutorial on maintaining your Engage roster, including updating positions. Next up is reserving space. So all RSOs can book space on campus through EMS. The first step to booking space on campus is ensuring that you or other qualified organization members have granted the appropriate access. So RSOs actually use Engage's roster tool to manage room reservation access. So you just scan the QR code in the green box and it'll teach you all about how you can assign a position to a member in Engage to give them access in our event management system. And finally, if you haven't seen it already, we have an entire web page dedicated to annual registration that outlines each step of the process very thoroughly. You can scan the QR code in the blue box to use this resource as a reference throughout the annual registration process. We have broken down every step with step-by-step instructions and tutorials and explanations for how to complete the process. Another great tool for RSO leaders is our Student Organization Resource Guide. Now, this handbook was actually created to serve as a resource for all of our GT student leaders and really just help you all navigate the different resources that are available to you. So even beyond the pages that I've shown here, there is info within the resource guide that talks about student organization finances, RSO storage lockers, event planning. It is definitely a helpful resource to have handy to you as an RSO leader. So scan that QR code or head over to our website to check out the full guide and keep it handy throughout the year. One thing you will find within your student organization resource guide is an officer checklist. So though each of these steps are not required, they are highly recommended as we think they will set you up for a good year with your RSO. Let's look over them now. First, meet with your faculty and staff advisor. This is always something that could be helpful just to get on the right page with your faculty or staff advisor and ensure that you all have a plan for the incoming semester. If you're not sure who your advisor is, you can check your Engage roster or email engage@godtech.edu for more support. Next, review your organization's constitution and officer duties. Now, this is an important one that a lot of people forget. You can find your organization's constitution and your Engage portal in the Documents section. Everyone's constitution or bylaws lives there. Definitely check out this document to learn more about how your organization is intended to run. Next, make sure your officers are listed in your Engage roster. Now, this one might sound like a broken record at this point because I've mentioned it so many times, but definitely go back and check out the tutorials that I've already shown on how to update and manage officer positions on your Engage portal. Making sure that all of these positions are updated is crucial to receiving information, as we only send out key updates and resources to people that are tagged with an officer position in Engage. If you're not tagged with an officer position, you may be missing out on important communications. Next, add room reservation access for officers who can book space on behalf of your RSO. You can visit your Engage roster to do this like I just previously mentioned. This is an important step for planning an events and making sure that your group has space to operate in. If you haven't already, check out our tutorial on how to designate room reservation access for your organization. Next, check in on your organization's finances by meeting with your designated accountant in SOFO. All registered student organizations have a designated accountant in the Student Organization Finance Office. You can visit sofo.godtech.edu to get started. Next, add your events and programs to Engage to easily promote them across campus. Now, like I mentioned earlier, these things aren't required, but this is something that we highly recommend as we think it would be a great way for you to advertise what your organization is doing and to get the word out to people across campus. And lastly, RSVP for student leadership opportunities like the Leaders Summit and Student Leader Retreat. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed, we have plenty of events that we create for our RSO leaders specifically, whether they need support, they need community, whatever it may be. So if you complete this entire checklist, we guarantee that you'll be starting off your year as an RSO on the right foot. Now let's talk more about these events that we have designed for RSO leaders. For both our new and returning leaders, we do offer specialized events just for you. Starting out in the fall and moving into the spring semester, first we have the Big Buzz. The Big Buzz is an annual student leadership social where only RSO officers are invited. Taking place in August at the Big Buzz, you can actually mingle with other student leaders. We invite key staff and faculty for you to network, and it's a great opportunity here at Tech. The Big Buzz is designed to help you start building your network as soon as you get to campus in the fall. Next up is the Student Leader Summit. The Leaders Summit is an annual leadership development and training conference that's historically hosted by the Center for Student Engagement and the Student Government Association. The topics discussed at the Student Leader Summit change every year, as does the theme. This past year, we talked about RSO Finances, marketing yourself as a student leader, and implementing inclusivity in student organizations. This event typically takes place around September and October, and it does have an attendance cap, so be on the lookout for when the RSVP form comes out. Next up, in the spring semester, we have the Student Leader Retreat. Different from the Student Leader Summit, the Student Leader Retreat takes place in January or February of the spring semester and is a 2-day overnight program that aims to create a space where students can practice their leadership skills, collaborate with other organizations, and develop relationships with administrators. This year, attendees will get an inside look on the John Lewis Leadership Pathways program. During the retreat, participants will provide feedback, suggestions on how the program should be shaped in order to best serve our students. And finally, a reoccurring experience we will be offering soon is the John Lewis Leadership Pathways. This is a Choose Your Own Adventure Pathways program that will involve presentations, initiatives, and activities at the Institute that encourage and develop student leadership skills. Students are going to have the opportunity to craft their own experience and specialize in a leadership style of your own choosing. Any student who completes a pathway will receive a special honor. Now, together, each of these events are spread throughout the year with the goal of creating community and opportunities for learning, growth, and practice among RSO leaders. Here at Tech, you're going to be able to find all of these events on Engage, so when the time comes, be on the lookout. Now, before we go, don't forget that you must complete the post-training form to get credit for attending the Officer Onboarding Training. Upon completion of this training, in just a second, please follow the link that is displayed on your screen here, bit.ly/ARtraining23, to complete a form that will ask you for some additional information to confirm your attendance. If you have any trouble accessing this link, please let us know at engage@gatech.edu. Well, that's all I have for you all. If you still have questions about annual registration or being a RSO leader after this webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to us with your questions. You can always email us at engage.gatech.edu, visit us online at studentengagement.gatech.edu, or come visit us in the John Lewis Student Center. You can also give us a call. I'm sure one of our student assistants would love to help you at 404-894-3458. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out. Congratulations on your new role, and thank you for attending the 2023 Officer Onboarding Training.